Good Shabbos. This week is Parshas V'eschanan, and in this week's portion we have the Ten Commandments. The second time it's actually noted in the Torah. The first time is in Yisro when the Torah is given on Mount Sinai. And there's a section of the Ten Commandments, a passage, which I think is sometimes overlooked. And that's in the second of the commandments. It says, "Lo yeh l'chol him acher ma'pana," you should not have any other gods in front of me. And it says, what happens if you do? Ki anochi Hashem Elokecha, because I am the Lord your God. El kana, a jealous God. Pokein avon avos abanim, val shileshim val ribeim l'sonai, who remembers the sin of the fathers on the children for 3 and 4 generations, for those that hate me. V'osa chesed alafim, and I do kindness for 2,000 generations. La'ohavai l'shomer mitzvosai, to those that love me and keep my commandments. Now, Medrash says, you see how much greater kindness is than punishment. Because if you do a mitzvah, if you follow a commandment, it's remembered for 2,000 generations. A sin is only for 4 generations. It's 500 times more kindness than there is punishment or harsh judgment by God. But the problem is, we have a very famous verse in Parshas Kiseitze, in the book of Devarim, that says, La yumsu avos albanim, fathers should not die for the sin of their children. Uvanim la yumsu al avos, and sons should not die for the sins of their fathers. Ish b'cheta yumaso, each man or each person should die with his own sin. And I don't think anyone limits this just to death. It's just saying that, of course, I'm not responsible for my father. My father is not responsible for me. And that's a very important rule in the Torah. But yet here we see that it says no, that for 3 or 4 generations, God will punish. And I think there's an obvious difference, which makes it even more difficult. There, the Torah is commanding the court, the human court, that you shouldn't judge fathers for children and children for fathers or parents, right? That's a human court. But when it comes to God, it says God is a jealous God who remember the sin of the parents on the children for 3 or 4 generations. God is not keeping the ethics and the morals that he expects and commands to us human beings? How is that possible? So I think the answer is somewhat simple. That when we talk about God, we're not just talking about a vengeful God. We're talking about how God created the world. We're talking about the nature of the world. And I think it's very important to make a distinction. Sure, if someone comes to court and he's found guilty, we're not going to punish their children. Just the opposite. We should have mercy and we should have empathy for those children who suffer because their father might have been executed or put in prison, for that matter. Any type of punishment that comes to the father creates a stigma for the children. It makes it very difficult for them to live, both in the community and even financially. And therefore, we should actually give them more kindness than would normally be expected for other people. So what's going on here? The answer, though, is when it comes to God, it's, as I said, it's nature. And what do I mean by nature? God is saying, and the Torah is telling us, that when someone sins, I think it's obvious, if somebody is caught stealing or, in extreme case, murdering, the children are going to suffer. There's no way around that. It's true. A human court or a Jewish court, a Beis Din, is not going to take these children and say, you have to be punished because your father sinned. But it's natural occurrence that if the father or the mother is in prison, the children are going to suffer. They're going to grow up without a father or mother. They're going to have the community look at them in a negative light. There's so many difficulties that you can't even imagine. So all the Torah really is saying is that God cannot change the way of the world. You could ask a theological question, why did God create the world that way? But I think we could all understand that that's nature. There's no way to avoid that. Of course, there's always unintended consequences for either your own act or for the punishment that comes as a result of God saying he's a jealous God and that he will not let someone who worships idols live. But I think we have to understand, and then we have to take this to heart, that when we do something wrong, we might feel we want to take responsibility. We don't care. We could rationalize it. But we have to understand that it will affect 3 or 4 generations, or maybe even more. It will affect our family, our community. What we do affects your spouse. There's no way that what you do is just limited to yourself, unless it's completely and totally secret and no one finds out. And even then, there's unintended consequences. So we have to understand that. And it's saying very beautifully that if you do something good, if you're Makadosh Shem Shemaim, if you sanctify the name of God, or if you just act in a moral way, if you do acts of kindness, that translates into your children learning that, other people treating your children well, and that will last for far, far longer than the sin. When something happens, something sinful, there's always an ability for the community to correct what goes on in a family. It might take, that's why maybe the Torah says 3 or 4. Why does it say 3 or 4? If it's 4, it should say just 4. If it's 3, it should just be 3. It's saying, yes, it sometimes could take 3 generations, 4, maybe it even takes more, maybe less. But the fact that you do something wrong, it shouldn't be inherent in, and something which is carried down to generation because it's inherently wrong. It's sheker, it's falsehood. If you do something correct, that which you did correct, that's what you did in the derech ha'emes, the truthful way, that will have a great and much larger impact on your family, those around you, and for generations to come. If we take this to heart, I think we've learned a good lesson, and not think of God as vengeful, even though the Torah says vengeful. I think we have to look at it as God is saying, is warning you. These are the consequences, the unintended consequences of your actions. Good Shabbos.